do slow down and take time to talk to people and have that bench conversation, isn't it? I thought it would be a good opportunity today, after hearing Rob's testimony, for maybe us to share some of those experiences that we've had in our lives. And I'm going to put Bill on the spot here, because I thought of something that had happened in his life that's his testimony, and I talked to him about that this morning. I don't know if he feels comfortable sharing that or not, but if he does, I'd invite him to come up. But if not, now's your opportunity to share your little testimony.
Well, I have a story. I love to tell stories. And I also have a sermon. Now, Mary Dan has heard my story about my friends Michael and Jean Hartford. I first met Michael and Jean when I was trying to establish a congregation in Mankato, Minnesota, when I worked for the Jolly Green Giant. And to make this lighter, I've told many of you my story about the giant. He caught a bad yeast infection. The Pillsbury Company bought him. And after a couple years with the company, he said goodbye. So I was out of work, but I have been blessed throughout my life. But Michael and Jean, back to them. I had a list of church members that might be in the area of Mankato. And so I knocked on this door, and Gina Hartford, newly married, I gather, came to the door, and I introduced myself. And she said, "Michael, there's somebody from your church here." So that was how I became acquainted with Mike and Jean. They were struggling students at Mankato State College, and I was working in the product development department at Green Giant. Well, eventually Michael started to work for the product development as a lower level employee, not very high salaries, and then Jean became employed. But one of the things in that job, I had lots of samples to take home. So I shared them with Mike and Jean. So that was my experience at becoming acquainted with Michael and Jean. Well, it happens Jean has stayed in the food industry, and she's is a sales representative for a chicken processing company in Minnesota, I believe, or Wisconsin, I'm not sure which. But they make things like the Chick-fil-A has. And she came down here on a sales meeting with a car full of samples. Well, my freezer is full of samples now, and I'm not going to starve. I'm going to have chicken to eat. Now, my sermon. I have discovered that I like to talk to people. And one of the things I do, it's so easy to check out of the checkout lane at Walmart. Well, these are people. And at least say, "How are you? Good morning, good afternoon," and call them by name. They have their name tag. Recognize them as people. This has paid off in huge dividends in my life. To speak to people, try to think of something that will connect you with them and maybe provide them with a little bit of joy and help them smile. But when I first moved here a little over a year ago, I was located at Point Royale. Up on the deck high was a neighbor, and he had plants and such, so I started making silly little comments to that neighbor. Things like, "You're kind of ugly, aren't you?" But that neighbor has become a dear friend and provided much support that Luella and I have needed. So my sermon, reach out and recognize that God's people are all around you.
I wasn't specifically asked to share, but listening to Rob's testimony today, it came very apparent that I needed to share. Many of you don't know me very well. Some of you know me very well, but I haven't really shared a whole lot to the congregation yet about my personal life, about my husband and I, Michael. We have been to many, many congregations because we've moved a lot. And in moving, I get to meet new families. I get to meet new people, new friends. And I love it. I found out I really loved it. When we lived in Bremerton, Washington, that's where I first met Rob's wife, Barb. And she was at women's retreat with me. And I really enjoyed that time with women. Nothing's better than getting together with other people, and especially women, and talking and talking and talking, because that's what we love to do. And we love to pamper ourselves. And so one time they came and we did a mani-pedi, which is a pedicure and a manicure. And we just had so much fun talking and enjoying each other. We always went to the Oregon coast because it was a beautiful shoreline there and we places to walk. We loved walking along the beach, and that was some of my favorite times. Well, because we've moved so much, we've lived in Alaska, we've lived in Arizona, we've lived in Virginia, we've lived in Oklahoma, we've lived in Nebraska, and we've lived in Turkey. Well, when we were in Turkey, we happened to find out that, what was his first name? Wayne Ham was bringing over a group of Community of Christ members to do some sightseeing because there's a lot of antiquities there, there's a lot of Christian places there, there's City of Troy, there's Ephesus, Santa Claus's house, all sorts of things there that are wonderful. Well, somehow we met with Wayne. I don't exactly know how we met with him, but we found he was in town, and he was with a couple that I knew from Independence, Missouri. Well, I grew up in Independence, and my dad is a Dillon, and the Dillon farm happened to be close to the Long farm in Wyoming. So this goes back to the 1930s, that they've had this relationship. Well, this is a relationship with the Community of Christ. So my dad met Dan and Lucy Long, and through Lucy, who was a nurse at the Independence Sand, because at that time, to become a nurse, you had to go to Graceland College in Lamona, Iowa, and then you had to finish with your practicum there in the Sand in Independence. So that's what you had to do to finish your nursing degree. Well, lo and behold, I went to visit Lucy. She was so glad to see me and visit with us. And of course, we brought her home with us for meals and shared things with her. Well, she had a friend that she met. Well, happened to be Becky Long. Well, lo and behold, my family knows the Long family. So Becky met and married Dan, which is Lucy's brother. So this world goes around and around, and we meet more people. Well, throughout Michael's career, things have happened. We've lived in Vancouver, Washington, and we've lived in Paulsville, Washington, other places that we loved. We got to meet more people, become more friends. I first met Mary Dan when I went to Platte Woods congregation in Missouri, believe it or not. This was a time when I was married to my first husband, and I had been a member of the church, but I wasn't really participating because my first husband was not a member. So he didn't attend church with me. And so it was kind of a struggle at times to go to church by yourself when you didn't know anybody. So I don't know how I got the courage, but somehow I decided I was praying a lot, and I was needing the Lord to be in my life. And I knew I needed that. So I decided I was going to go by myself. So I drove up in the parking lot of the church, and lo and behold, this woman and her husband got out of the car, and I started walking up to church. And this lady said, "Oh, you're new today, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." I said, "This is my first time coming here." She said, "Well, I'm the organist today." It happened to be Mary Ann's mother. So I met her and immediately felt part of the congregation because she introduced me to everyone there. She made me feel welcome. Well, because of that happenstance, I met another couple there, the Melhams, Andrea and her husband Jim. Well, there was a time in our life when Michael was unemployed, and he looked for a job, and he found one in Atlanta, Georgia. Well, guess where the Melhams lived? Atlanta, Georgia. And they had a spare room, and they had a space for Michael to come and stay with them while he worked, and he commuted back and forth on his motorcycle. He drove all the way across the United States to Georgia, and that was his transportation to and from work. So that was what he did. Well, that was, again, a blessing, because had they not been there, he would have had to probably stay in a hotel or motel. I don't know exactly what we would have done, because he left us in Vancouver, Washington, with 2 children that we had adopted in Turkey when we were over there. So that was a time when I needed to stay home with the kids, and he needed to be by himself. Well, that was, believe it or not, a tough time, because being in the military, a lot of times you're separated. The only time I was separated from Michael was when he was unemployed that time for about 9 months, I think it was, or something like that. Never in the military was I separated much, except for maybe a weekend or a week or something like that. But throughout my times with meeting people through this international church that we have, I always look forward to seeing people that I've met from Alaska, Arizona, Virginia, Oklahoma, when I go to World Conference. And it's wonderful to see people there, to know that you've met them before and to update yourself with them. We even, when we lived in Omaha, that's how we met Mike and Jean Hartford. They were attending congregation there in Omaha. So when somehow through conversation with Bill and Luella, we found out that they knew the Hartfords too. Well, I knew the Hartfords. Then Mary Dan talked about Jean Hartford, and I'm like, I know her. So there again, small worlds. This international church of ours, we meet people, and we need people, and they are there for us. And it's the neatest response to have, the love you have in your heart for your church family, because they are family, and they make you feel like you're welcome. And I love that about this church. And when we were in Omaha, we had a chance to meet Tahitian girls that came, and we invited them into our home because they were visiting for, I think it was a week. And we invited them into our home and got to meet them, and they attended church with us many, many times. Because we got to meet them, we have an open invitation to go to Tahiti sometime, because her father owns a hotel, and she said, we're welcome there anytime. Well, where else in the world do you have a standing invitation like that? Except for a meeting that I had with a church member that was wonderful, that made me feel like I was at home and they were family and I was family.
I guess we're just supposed to take our turn.
Sure.
Yes.
See if I can stand up here. I can always get a hold of something over here. Some 68 years ago, next spring, we moved to Independence. And Betty was 8 months into our oldest daughter's life. And John Blumenshine, Dr. Don Blumenshine, a gynecologist, came to Independence at the same time. And so our daughter was his first delivery in Independence. Linda will be 68 next spring. Right? The reason I go way back then is because this story is go on and on and on, and that's the way stories do. But they have meaning in our lives and in the lives of others. Dr. Blumenshine had a dream. Beyond his dreams in Independence was a dream of Honduras and the fact that he wanted to establish a mission there. And it was such a powerful dream that after he came up with very bad cancer, and he still had the dream, and he was going to do it. It was going to be part of his life. And so he did go to Honduras, and he did establish a mission of in Honduras. It was on a lake that had no access except going across the lake. And we heard a little bit about it through her life. And I believe it was in the 70s, we were asked to go on a mission there with the medical dental team from church, from the Community of Christ. And we were not, that was not our thing. I was in construction, but they wanted me particularly to do some things. They got moved into a new building, new facility, and they wanted me to look after getting this moved in. They wanted Betty to be a dental assistant, which she was not, but she did a very good job of washing instruments and things. And so I need to lean on some.
You can take that off.
I'm sorry about that, but my balance is bad. So anyhow, we went on this mission, and it was very, very interesting because this was a fruition of Dr. Blumenshine's and Marianne Blumenshine, of their dream. They had, I believe, 7 children, and they moved to Honduras. And so we met the Honduran people and somewhat, and learned a lot about the country and such. Yesterday in the paper, I don't know whether you read the Springfield paper, but there's a retired Army chaplain that writes in the paper. He happens to be a Baptist, but he writes very interesting articles about life. And you wouldn't know that he had a denomination really, because he's into life and the people's lives. And he talked to his daughter is on a mission in Honduras, and he is looking for volunteers to go down and help with this mission. And so here's another thing in life that brings out this. We've been seeing a lot about the Honduran people and what they're going through with the gangs and the things, and the women are bringing their children, and the men are bringing their children to the United States to try to get some relief from the terrible things that are going on there. And so my point is that life goes on and on and on and on, and there's a lot of people come into it. It isn't all just members of this church or members of any church, but the fact that the need that we need to be concerned about is the concern for people of the world, people, all our neighbors and friends. and not friends, just people that need our help or need our consolation or whatever to proceed in life. I know it's not an easy thing to always agree with others, but yet we have the commonality. We're all God's creation. We're all human. We all are striving ultimately for the same thing. We sometimes don't realize we have the same goals, but we do. And but anyhow, I guess that's about all I got to say. Is life goes on and on and on. We're looking at 90. We never thought we'd ever see it. Now, why we're still here, we're yet to determine, but evidently we got some more work to do. God bless everybody.
When I was in my 20s, I went to, I can't remember where I went, but anyway, I ran into a friend that I'd known for years before, but hadn't seen for a long time. And so we talked for a little bit, and then I invited her over to our house for supper. And she came, and when she got there, she said, "Now I'll have to leave as soon as we finish eating," because she said, I'm going to a class to learn how to do Braille. And I said, "Really?" I said, "Where do you go?" And she says, "Well, the church has a program where they will teach you to write Braille, and then you can volunteer." And she said it's every Tuesday night. And so, and at the time, I think Philona Stevens was teaching it. And I said, well, and that's something I don't know why, but I'd always wanted to do. And I asked her if I could go with her, and she said, sure. So I went, and then I stayed and continued on. And it takes about a year to learn all the code and everything, but I was so anxious. I got it finished in 6 months, and transcribed a book, a child's book, that nobody else could proofread, and sent to the Library of Congress, and so it's in the Library of Congress now. And then I became a certified Brailler. And then after that, we went to, well, I did a few books for the church, and then they said they needed somebody to do math books, and that's an entirely different code. It's entirely different from what I had learned. And so I studied that and got to where I could do that. And then at that time in Missouri, if you were blind, you couldn't go to school. You had to go to the blind school in St. Louis and leave their families and go there. But in Kansas, they accepted them right into the school system. And so there was some children over there in Kansas that needed math books. And so I brailled all their math books and got really neat letters from them thanking me. And then when we went to Texas, I thought, well, we just come down here to just kind of relax and play. And so, but there's a lot of teachers that come to church, and so they asked me if I would come to the school there, to the elementary school, and talk to this little blind boy. And he was in the 3rd grade, and I said, well, okay, I guess I can do that. And so John took me up there, and I said, I probably won't be gone very long, because I said, I'm probably just going to meet him, and that's it, I guess I was 2 hours or something, in there. And he was such a sweet little boy. I just loved Mario. And I did all of Mario's math tests and papers, and even went to school and helped him when he was taking a math test. I had to braille his math test, and then I'd go and help him, and he was right in the class with all the other kids. And then I stayed with him until he was in middle school. And then eventually, of course, the church decided that not to have this program anymore. And I don't know if it was financial reasons or what, but they decided not to. And so I just quit doing Braille. But I would still go to school and take my Braille writer and show the kids how to do it and do their names in Braille and everything. But I want to say this, if you give, you get so much more in return, and I sure did.
Is there anyone else that wanted to share today?